His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. The wind came low and steady across the high plains that winter, carrying the scent of snow not yet fallen, and the faint iron taste of coming hardship. Dust lay thick on everything: the porch rails, the empty corral, the single window that looked out toward the unbroken horizon. Inside the small house, the stove had gone cold hours before, but she made no move to light it again. Clara sat in the straight-backed chair by the window, hands folded in her lap like a prayer no one would answer. Her dress, once blue, had faded to the color of forgotten sky. The room held only the things she had brought with her 3 years earlier: a chipped porcelain cup, a quilt piece from her mother's old dresses, a Bible with pages worn thin at the Psalms. Nothing else had been added. Nothing else had been needed. Outside, the land stretched flat and merciless under a sky the color of old pewter. Cattle long since sold or drifted away. The barn door hung crooked on one hinge, swaying in the wind like a slow heartbeat. She had stopped counting the days since the letter came, the one that said her husband would not be coming back from the war. Not alive. Not at all. She did not cry anymore. The tears had dried up somewhere between the telegram and the grave she dug herself because the ground was too hard for anyone else to bother. Now she simply waited. For what she could no longer say. The waiting had become its own shape, its own gravity. Footsteps sounded on the frozen path, slow, deliberate, the crunch of boots breaking thin ice. She did not turn her head. She had heard footsteps before. Neighbors bringing pity in the form of bread or firewood, their voices soft and careful as if grief might shatter like glass. They always left again. The knock came, 3 measured raps, then silence. She rose without hurry, smoothed her skirt though no one would notice, and opened the door. The man standing there was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a sheepskin coat gone patchy with wear. His hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes the color of winter river water. A week's growth of beard darkened his jaw. He carried no parcel, no offering, only himself. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough as gravel under iron wheels. "Name's Elias Crow. Live 2 sections over." She nodded once, waiting. "Heard you was still here. Alone." Another nod. He shifted his weight, glanced past her into the dim room. "Winter's coming hard. Stock's thin everywhere. Thought I'd see if you needed anything." "I manage," she said. The words came out flat, practiced. He studied her a long moment. Then he removed his hat, held it against his chest. "Ain't asking charity. Just saying if you need a hand with the roof or the pump or the wood, I'm there." She looked at him, then really looked. Saw the lines carved deep around his mouth, the way his left hand trembled slightly when he gripped the hat brim. Saw also the quiet steadiness in him, like a rock worn smooth by years of water. "Thank you," she said, "but I manage." He replaced the hat. "Offer stands." He turned to go. "Mr. Crow," she called after him. He stopped. She hesitated. The wind tugged at her shawl. "The roof leaks." "In the kitchen." He looked back over his shoulder. "I'll come tomorrow. Bring tools." She did not answer. He walked away into the gray afternoon boots, leaving shallow prints in the frost that would vanish by morning. That night she lay awake, listening to the house groan against the wind. For the first time in months, the silence felt different. Not empty, simply waiting. The next morning he came as promised. No words of greeting. He set his tools on the porch, climbed the ladder without asking permission, and began patching the shingles. She watched from the doorway, arms crossed against the cold. He worked steadily, methodically. When a nail slipped from his fingers and fell into the snow, he cursed softly under his breath, then glanced toward the house as if afraid she had heard. She pretended not to notice. By noon the roof no longer dripped. He came down, brushed snow from his coat, and stood looking at the house as though measuring it. "Anything else?" he asked. She shook her head. He nodded once, gathered his tools, and started down the path. "Mr. Crow," she said again. He paused. "There's coffee inside, if you're cold." He considered this. Then he came back up the steps. The kitchen was small, the table scarred from years of use. She poured coffee into the chipped cup for him and water into a tin for herself. They sat across from each other without speaking. The coffee steamed between them like a fragile truce. After a long while he said, "My wife died 4 winters back. Pneumonia. Took her quick." Clara looked at her hands. "I'm sorry." He shrugged the motion, small and contained. "Wasn't your doing?" More silence. Then quietly, "I keep the place up. For her. Even though she's gone." Clara understood that kind of keeping. She had done the same, kept the house clean, the bed, made the plates stacked as though order might hold back the chaos of absence. "I buried my husband myself," she said. The words surprised her. She had not spoken them aloud before. Elias looked at her, then really looked. "Must have been hard." It was. He drank the last of his coffee. Stood. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "Check the chimney." She did not protest. When he had gone, she stood at the window, watching his figure grow smaller against the white land. The wind had dropped. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt almost companionable. The days shortened. Light came late and left early, as though the sun itself had grown weary of the plains. Elias came each morning without announcement, his breath clouding white before him. He split wood in the yard, repaired fence posts that had leaned too long, mended the barn door so it closed without complaint. She watched him from the kitchen window, hands busy with dough or mending, pretending the work was ordinary. He never asked to be paid. She never offered. One afternoon the temperature dropped suddenly, the kind of cold that finds the seams in every garment and settles against the bone. She carried an armload of split pine inside and found him already there, crouched before the stove, coaxing flame from damp kindling. His coat was off, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The firelight caught the faint scar that ran along his left forearm, old, pale, the shape of something sharp that had once bitten deep. He glanced up. Chimney was blocked. Took the soot out. She set the wood down. "You didn't have to." "Didn't have to come at all," he said, and stood. "But here I am." They stood a moment in the small heat of the stove. The room smelled of pine resin and coal smoke and the faint, clean sweat of work. She felt the silence stretch, not uncomfortable now, only careful. "I made bread," she said. "It's still warm." He nodded once. They ate at the scarred table. The bread broke open with a soft crack, steam rising. She spread a thin layer of preserves she had put up the summer before, a last plum, the last jar. He ate slowly, as though tasting memory. Afterward he helped her wash the dishes. His hands were large, calloused, careful not to chip the cup. When their fingers brushed passing a plate, neither pulled away quickly. The moment passed like a held breath. That night she lay listening to the house settle. The wind had died. In its place came a stillness so deep she could hear her own heartbeat. She thought of the letter folded in the bottom drawer, the words she had read until they lost meaning. She thought of Elias's hands on the axe handle, steady, unhurried. She thought how strange it was that help could arrive so quietly, wearing worn boots and saying so little. Weeks turned. Snow came in drifts that covered the porch steps and muffled every sound. Elias brought a sled, once loaded with firewood cut from the cottonwoods along the creek. Another time he carried a haunch of venison wrapped in burlap, taken cleanly with a single shot. She accepted both without protest. She began to cook enough for 2. He began to stay longer after the meal, sitting by the stove while she read aloud from the Psalms or simply watched the fire. One evening he spoke of his wife. Her name was Ruth, he said. The words came slow, as though pulled from deep water. She liked to plant things, flowers mostly, things that shouldn't grow here. but some of them did. Clara looked at the window where frost had made lace against the glass. "I used to keep a garden," she said. "Before." He nodded, saw the patch out back. Ground's hard but not dead. She felt something loosen inside her chest, small and unexpected. The next morning she went out with him. The cold burned her lungs. He showed her how to clear snow from around the young plum tree she had planted the first spring after her husband left for the war. They worked side by side, breath clouding together. When her glove tore on a branch, he took her hand without asking, wrapped his own muffler around the cut, tied it off with careful knots. Neither spoke of it. That night, after he had gone, she sat by the lamp and unpicked the stitches on one of her husband's old shirts. She cut the fabric into strips, sewed them into a small quilt square. The cloth still carried the faint smell of tobacco and saddle leather. She pressed her face to it once, then folded it away. Spring came reluctant, the ground thawing in patches. Mud clung to everything. Elias arrived one morning with a sack of seed potatoes and a hoe. They planted together in the old garden plot. Her hands in the cold soil felt alive again, raw and hopeful. He worked beside her without hurry, showing her how deep to set each piece, how to hill the rows against late frost. When they finished, the sun stood low and gold. He straightened, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "Clara," he said. He had never used her name before. She looked up. "You don't have to stay alone," he said. The words were plain without flourish. "If you want different?" She felt the weight of the question settle over her like new snow, soft, heavy, possible. She did not answer then, but she did not look away. Subscribe to see humanity rise above harsh law. The question hung between them through the rest of that spring like smoke from a distant fire, present, not pressing, but impossible to ignore. Clara felt it settle into her days the way damp earth holds the shape of a boot print long after the foot is gone. She worked harder now. Not to prove anything, but because motion kept the doubt from rooting too deep. She walked the fence line alone some mornings, checking wire that needed no checking, listening to meadowlarks rise and fall in the tall grass. The land no longer felt like punishment. It felt like waiting room furniture, plain, worn, necessary. Elias kept his rhythm. He came most days, left before dark. They spoke of small things, the way the creek ran higher this year, how the early calves looked stronger than last spring's lot, which of the old apple trees might still bear if pruned right. He never pushed. She never invited more than the day offered. One afternoon, thunderheads built in the west, dark and bruise-colored. Wind flattened the grass in long silver waves. She was in the garden pulling weeds when the first fat drop struck her neck. She straightened, hand to her brow, and saw him riding up the two-rut track, coat flapping like a broken wing. He swung down before the horse stopped, tied the reins to the porch rail. Rain began in earnest, then hard and sudden. They ran inside together, boots leaving wet prints across the floorboards. The kitchen darkened under the storm. She lit the lamp. He stood by the door, water dripping from his hat brim, watching her move. "You'll catch your death standing there," she said. He took off the hat, set it on the peg. "Reckon I will." She poured coffee strong, the way he liked it. They sat. Rain hammered the tin roof like impatient fingers. Lightning walked the horizon, pale and silent. After a time he said, "My brother's coming next month." "From Cheyenne?" "Wants me to sell the place, move into town with him. Says a man my age shouldn't live alone." Clara felt the words land low in her stomach. "He's got a store," Elias went on. "Thinks I could clerk. Keep books. Says the ranch is played out." She looked at her hands. They were brown now from sun nails, short and cracked from soil. "Is it?" He gave a small, dry laugh. "Maybe. But it's mine." Thunder rolled closer, shook the window glass. "And you?" he asked quietly. You ever think of leaving? She considered the question the way she considered a stitch before pulling it tight. I thought of it every day the first year. Thought I'd sell everything, take the train east, start over where nobody knew my name. But you stayed. I stayed. Why? She met his eyes then. Because running didn't feel like living. It felt like dying slower. He nodded once, slow. The lamp flame steadied. Rain slackened. Light returned in thin, watery bars across the floor. He stood. I'll check the barn before I go. Wind tore a board loose yesterday. She followed him out. The air smelled of wet sage and ozone. Mud sucked at their boots. In the barn he found the loose plank, hammered it back with steady strokes. She held the lantern high. Shadows danced on the rafters. When he finished, he turned to her. Raindrops still clung to his lashes. "Clara," he said, "I ain't good with words. Never was. What? But I've been thinking on this a long time." She waited. "I don't want to go to Cheyenne," he said. "Don't want to clerk in a store. Don't want to live in a town where the only thing that matters is how much money a man's got in his pocket." He stepped closer, not touching. Just near enough she could smell the wet wool of his coat, the faint leather of his gloves. "I want to stay here," he said, "on this ground, with the wind and the winters and the summers that burn everything brown. And if you'll have me, if you want the same, I'd like to stay with you." The words were plain, no poetry in them, only truth worn smooth by years of carrying. She felt tears come then, not the hot, sudden kind, but slow and quiet like snowmelt finding its way to the creek. She did not wipe them away. "I'm afraid," she said. The admission surprised her. "Afraid it won't last. Afraid I'll wake up one morning and find you gone the way he went." "I can't promise forever," Elias said. "Nobody can. But I can promise tomorrow, and the day after, and every day I've got left." She looked at the barn floor, at the straw scattered under their feet, at the small circle of lantern light holding them both. "Then stay," she said. He exhaled a sound almost like relief. Then he reached out slow, giving her time, and took her hand. His fingers were cold from the rain, but steady. They stood that way a long time while the storm moved east and left behind a sky rinsed clean. The next morning the world looked new washed. Sun struck the wet grass and turned it gold. Elias came early, brought no tools this time, only himself. They walked the garden together. She showed him where she planned to put beans, where the tomatoes would go if the frost held off. He listened, nodded. Once he bent and pulled a weed she had missed. A small gesture. Enough. That evening they sat on the porch as dusk came down. No words necessary. The sky turned rose and violet over the flat land. Somewhere a coyote yipped once, answered by another. The sound carried clean across the miles. Clara reached over and laid her hand on his. He turned his palm up, closed his fingers around hers. Neither spoke. They did not need to. The summer arrived slow and heavy, the kind that presses down on the chest until breathing feels like labor. Grass turned gold under relentless sun. Dust rose in soft plumes behind every step. The garden Clara and Elias tended together began to show promise, green shoots of beans curling toward light tomato plants, heavy with small, hard fruit squash vines, sprawling shameless across the turned earth. They worked in rhythm now. She hoed between rows while he carried water from the well in 2 galvanized buckets, shoulders rolling with each careful pour. Sweat darkened the back of his shirt in the shape of wings. She wore a wide straw hat he had brought one morning without explanation, simply set it on the porch rail and walked away before she could thank him. One noon they stopped under the single cottonwood that grew beside the house. Its leaves whispered secrets to the wind. They sat on an old quilt she spread in the thin shade, drank from the same tin cup passed back and forth. Water tasted of iron and cool stone. He spoke first that day. "Brother wrote again," he said. "Says if I don't sell by fall, he'll come himself. Bring papers. Says the land's worth more to someone who can work it proper." Clara pulled a blade of grass between her fingers, split it lengthwise. "What did you tell him?" "Told him the land's spoken for." She looked up. His eyes were on the horizon, steady. "Not sure he believed me," Elias added. "He's always thought I was too stubborn for my own good." "Are you?" He gave a small smile, the first she had seen that reached his eyes. "Reckon I am." She let the grass fall. "And if he comes, then he comes." The words carried no bravado, only fact. She felt something settle inside her, not fear exactly, but the recognition that trouble, when it arrives, rarely asks permission. That evening a rider appeared on the horizon, dust trailing him like smoke. Clara watched from the porch, hand shading her eyes. Elias stood beside her, arms folded. The horse was lathered, the man lean and sharp-featured beneath a black hat. He reined up 20 feet from the steps, did not dismount. "Elias Crow," he called. "That's me. Name's Harlan Crow. Your brother sent me. I'm his lawyer." Elias did not move. "Heard he might send someone." Harlan glanced at Clara, then back. "Got papers here. Quit claim. Fair price. Enough to set you up comfortable in town, or anywhere you like." "I like here," Elias said. The lawyer smiled, thin and practiced. "Your brother thought you might say that. Also thought you might listen to reason. Land's drying up. No water rights worth a damn. You'll lose it one way or another." Clara felt heat rise in her face, not anger yet, but close. Elias stepped forward 1 pace. "You tell my brother he's welcome to ride out himself if he's got more to say. But these papers ain't leaving this place signed." Harlan studied him a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, produced an envelope, and dropped it at the foot of the steps. It landed soft in the dust. 30 days, he said. "That's what the law gives before he files. Think on it." He wheeled the horse and rode back the way he came. Dust swallowed him. Elias stared after the rider until the horizon reclaimed him. Then he bent, picked up the envelope, opened it without hurry. Read the lines once. Folded it again. Walked to the stove and fed the paper to the fire. Clara watched the flames take it. That night they sat outside long after dark. Stars hung low and fierce. A nighthawk called once high and lonely. "I won't let him take this from us," Elias said quietly. She reached for his hand. "I know." But doubt had entered the house, now quiet as a shadow under the door. She woke before dawn some mornings and lay listening to his steady breathing beside her on the narrow bed they had begun to share, without ceremony or announcement. She wondered if love was strong enough against ink and law and brothers who measured worth in dollars. A week later another letter arrived, not from the lawyer, but from a neighbor 3 miles east. The man wrote that Harlan had been asking questions in town about the widow who lived alone, about how long her husband had been gone before she took up with Elias, about whether the place had ever been properly deeded after the first owner died. Clara read the letter twice, then handed it to Elias without a word. He read it, crumpled it in his fist. "They'll try to say you ain't fit to hold title," he said. "Say the land should go to next of kin, or back to the government if there ain't any." She felt cold despite the heat. "My husband left no will. Everything was in his name." "I know." They sat in silence while cicadas screamed in the dry grass. Then Elias stood. "We'll go to town tomorrow. Find the county clerk. See what's on record." She nodded. The next morning they hitched the old mare to the wagon. The road was rutted, dusty. Elias drove with both hands on the reins. Clara sat beside him, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Neither spoke much. Words felt fragile, like things that might break if handled too roughly. In town, the clerk was an older man with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes. He pulled the ledger without comment, ran his finger down columns of names and dates. "Deeds in your husband's name," he said. "Transferred when he bought it from the railroad in 1892. No lion. No mortgage." Clara exhaled. But the clerk added, "There's a note here. Filed last month. Claim of adverse possession by a party named Harlan Croy. Says the land's been abandoned since your husband passed." Elias leaned forward. "It ain't abandoned." The clerk shrugged. "That's what the paper says. Judge'll have to decide if it comes to that." They left the office into blinding afternoon light. Elias helped her up into the wagon.